Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this first briefing of the year, which is, of course, part of the series of virtual briefings for MPs with the support of Wilderness Foundation Africa and ICCF. As always, thank you so much to the honorable members for joining us. We were going to have a few of the NCOP as well, but I think they've actually scheduled a session now. I want to say also thank you to the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, the Honorable Kasa, as usual, for hosting this briefing. He can't be with us today, unfortunately. He's tendered his apologies because he's on a flight at the moment. So today we are focusing on something that has become a bit of a buzzword, but that very few people, including myself, know a lot about. And I'm talking about the circular economy. Luckily for us, we do have a world expert on this exact topic who is joining us, and that's Professor Mark Swilling. Now, Professor Swilling, for those of you who don't know him, is the Distinguished Professor of Sustainable Development in the School of Public Leadership at the University of Stellenbosch, and he's also co-director of the Center for Complex Systems. He is a visiting research professor at the Center for Environmental Justice, Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and he had previously been a visiting professor at the University of Sheffield and Utrecht. In 2018, he was the Edward B. Bass Visiting Environmental Scholar at Yale University. He's published numerous books, of which his latest is perhaps something of real interest to the committee, and it's called The Age of Sustainability, A Just Transitions in a Complex World. He is a member of UNEP's International Resource Panel, and is also the deputy chair of the board of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And believe it or not, I actually he shortened bio a bit. So with that mouthful, I'm going to pass over to Professor Swilling. And as usual, honorable members, we will have time for questions and discussions afterwards. Mark, over to you.
Thanks very much, Melanie and Andrew, and thanks, Kristen, for setting up the logistics. And really good to meet all of you. Basically, I thought it might be useful is for me to just provide a global picture of the resource flow question and the energy transition question. The circular economy narrative really is different to the carbon and biodiversity narrative. The climate change carbon narrative is about decarbonization, and the biodiversity narrative is about the restoration of biodiversity and ecosystem services. The circular economy is really part of a wider narrative, which is about resources, the stuff that we extract from the crust of the earth, and the flow of those resources. And these three bodies of science is what has shaped the sustainability narrative. So you have the IPCC for climate, you have the IPBES for biodiversity, and the International Resource Panel is like the baby sister, because it was more recently established in 2007, which focuses on resource flows. And I was nominated by the South African government to be the South African expert on the International Resource Panel, where I've been since 2007. So what I'm going to be drawing on is initially just framing what this resource discussion and why and what circular means, and then we could in the Q&A we can have more of a discussion about the specifics that you are interested in within the South African context and how to apply this. But I'll also make reference to the global energy transition, because really the global energy transition is a transition away from the key resource which has driven the global economy, which is fossil fuels. And there's a very, very rapid transition out of fossil fuels globally into renewables. And I'll just give you a couple of pictures to substantiate that point. So I'm going to just take you to my slides, and then we can take it from there. Where are my slides now? Okay, here we go. So hopefully you can see that, and that's where I'll start. So okay, you can see that, right? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. So The starting point really is this report, which was published a couple of years ago, called Decoupling Natural Resource and Environmental Impacts from Economic Growth. And this concept of decoupling is absolutely central to the circular economy idea. Basically, how do we continue, especially when in a country like ours where we need economic development? How do we continue to meet material needs, improve human well-being, but utilize resources more efficiently? And the reason why that has become a major issue is this is the pattern of resource consumption since 1970. As you can see, just over 20 billion tons were consumed in 1970. If you push that back to 1900, it goes down to about 5. And as you can see, it's dramatically increased to nearly 70 billion tons by 2010. And obviously we're over that mark already. But if you look close at this, here's the green is biomass, the blue is fossil fuels, the light blue is metals, and the black here is non-metallic minerals. And the bulk of this is construction sand and cement. And the reason why this is growing so fast is because of rapid increases in urbanization since the 1960s in the global south. So we're putting people in concrete, and as a result, we need more and more of it. So if you look at this on a per capita basis, roughly just over 6 tons per capita on average, in 1970 going up to on average 10 globally. But this is an average. So in the US, it's about 35 tons per capita of this stuff that an average American or North American would consume. Through to maybe 4 or 5 tons in poorer, 3 or 4 tons in poorer. As a result of rising demand in resources, the long-term decline in resource prices, which is reflected here up until the turn of the millennium, has reversed itself and on an upward. Although there's ups and downs because of cycles, but the general trend is rising resource and energy prices. And as, if you just basic economics, as prices rise, there's a greater and greater incentive to innovate and utilize resources more efficiently. And that's a good thing. And that really is what the circular economy is all about. It's all the techniques for reusing more of your wastes, using your virgin materials more efficiently, building cities that weigh less because the materials are much lighter, and more efficient use of energy. So here's a picture of what the circular economy narrative is really trying to address. So the global population since 1970 has increased by 2, GDP by 4, GDP per capita by 2, but extraction of materials by 3.4, so it's higher than, and the material demand per capita has increased by 1.7. So if you look at domestic material consumption broken down according to development levels, the high income are averaging at around 16 tons per capita. That's what an average European actually is consuming. Upper middle income is between 6 and 20, lower middle income between 3 and 6, and low income around 3. And if you take into account the material footprint tons per capita, it's slightly different. What the material footprint does is allocate the resources used in the production of resources to the end consumer and not to the producer. And the result is, as you can see here, quite a big jump in the material footprint, in particular in the upper middle income and the high income areas. As you can see here, these haven't changed all that much, which is a reflection of inequality globally in resource terms. So the circular economy has to address that challenge, which it doesn't always. So if nothing is done between now and 2060, according to our models in the International Resource Panel, global extraction is going to more than double, and the planet's already falling to pieces based on what we are currently extracting, so nobody knows how that's possible. Greenhouse gas emissions will increase by 43% because it's actually resource extraction and use that's driving greenhouse gases. The agricultural area will increase by 20%, and in my view, because I study cities, this is very conservative. I think it's more than that. Global pasture land will increase by 25%, and we don't actually know where that land is because we basically used up globally, all the most productive land. It will reduce forests by 10% and reduce natural habitat by 20%. So what these figures were basically saying is, listen, if you are interested in a planet for our children in the future, business as usual basically means we're going to blow the fuses of that planet, and it won't be habitable in the way that it currently is. So from a resource point of view, of the top 10 exporters of primary resources. These are net exporters of resources. We could see South Africa's down here. And we're in the company of places like Canada, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Russia, and Australia. And these are the net importers of resources. So China has a lot of stuff, but it prefers to import and then keep its stuff in reserve for later. Will ensure its domination of the global resource flows. Japan, India, much of this is, this includes coal, even though India has coal, South Korea, Germany, Singapore, Italy, etc. Those are the top importers. So the world is changing. There's less and less exporters and more importers of primary resources as resource scarcities kick in. So this is metal production. This is what metal production looks like over more than the last century and a half. But as you can see from the 1960s, massive increase. And this is a big part of the emergence of the global South, BRICS, and the construction of and urbanization. It's an upward trend when at the same time the quality of ores. I'm just using copper as one example, but I could refer to all of them across which are the copper producers, especially Australia. You can see the quality of the ores in almost all of these places. And what that means is you have to dig out a hell of a lot more to extract less and less. And over time, that's going to translate into price increases. Just to give you a picture of of the number of elements on the elemental table that used to be used to make a microchip in the 1980s, that's how many, 11. This is how many, 4 more elements were added in the 1990s. And this is how many metals are now used, how many elements are used, 40 plus 45. So nearly the whole of the elemental table is now being mobilized by us in order to make our electronics, which is what the new world we're in depends on. And many of these are rare metals, and rare metals. So at a certain point, we're going to start running into problems. Interestingly, China, again, has got one of the highest concentrations of rare metals, but they prefer to buy rare metals from elsewhere in the world until everybody else more or less runs out, and then they have the monopoly. As far as just to give you one example of a non-metallic mineral, which is cement. China used more cement in the 3 years, 2011 to 2013, than the US used in 100 years. So that just gives you a picture of how big places like China, like India, and now increasingly Africa, as we put about 800 million people into cities over the next 30, 40 years, and many of them want to live in cement, you could see where that's taking us. So from the international resource point of view, what's very much at the center of a circular economy framework is this idea of decoupling. And it's not always easy to understand if you've been trained in climate science or biodiversity or ecosystem science, which are all perfectly legitimate. But what economy thinking is saying is we need to decouple. If you do want economic activity, economic growth, when certain places you don't want, but we do, and definitely in this part of the world, and you want a significant increase in human well-being, what you want to do is make sure that the resources that you require to achieve both do not increase at the same rate. And that is called resource decoupling. Environmentalists have traditionally focused on the reduction of environmental impacts, negative environmental impacts. That's impact decoupling. And this distinction between impact and resource decoupling is actually really important conceptually and in policy terms, because it relates to different things. The circular economy is focusing on these actual resource flows and how you use resources more efficiently and how you recycle. So to put it very crudely, this is the world as it is more or less now. On average, 10 tons per capita, and from a CO2 emissions point of view, 4.5 tons per capita. What's a world of where you have sustainable use of resources? And I know Andrew doesn't like this term, but I'm not using it in the same way that he's concerned about. This is, another phrase for this would be a global circular economy. Would basically be a world where you have 6 tons on average, 6 tons where inequalities have been significantly reduced. And according to the science of the IPCC, CO2 emissions are 2.2 tons per capita. So South Africa is at about 10 tons per capita of CO2, which is similar to Germany and UK. And that's because we've had cheap energy for so long, which is no longer the case. And so we are in the early stages of an energy transition as a result. So what is a circular economy? The circular economy is a shift from what one could call a linear metabolism. Metabolism, a bit like we process food and we have waste, so does the built environment. So you have material inputs of various kinds. If this is a city, this is basically from outside city boundaries. If this is a nation, a lot of the materials will come from within that nation. But if you're a Singapore, which is a city nation, everything comes from the outside. And you have wastes. And you want to get away from this linear metabolism, to put it very crudely, to a more circular metabolism. So when more of your wastes are used, you use less materials, and your economy is more circular. And it's pretty much as simple as that. And then you have to pay attention to each piece. What are you doing about waste? What are you doing about metals? What are you doing about fossil fuels? What are you doing about building materials? Can you shift to lighter materials? Can you use more wood? Can you use more bamboo? Can you use more, lower CO2 materials like steel frame and so on and so forth? So that's really the resource story. I want to shift briefly to the energy story. And South Africa has an energy choice to make. We can stay in the 20th century, become a laggard, or we can choose to become a world leader, because we have some of the best solar radiation and winds in the world. So we either exploit those resources or we don't. And there is a global energy transition underway, which I will just demonstrate very briefly. But I just want to deal with a misconception that many South Africans have, which is South Africans say, well, we contribute so little to global CO2 emissions. Why should we care? But this is South Africa, 1%, but so is the UK at 1%. If you look at Germany at 2%. So, and these are countries which do worry about climate change and are decarbonizing along with others. Obviously, the big players are China and the United States, and India is growing at 7%. So at 1%, we can't shirk our responsibilities. So the global context is fairly straightforward at the moment. Massive growth in investment renewables, over $300 billion, double fossil fuels and nuclear combined. Prices have dropped 5% in a decade compared to coal, where prices are increasing, nuclear is increasing. Divestments from coal are now pretty much across the board. All the biggest investors in the world are withdrawing from coal, except the main Chinese banks. Massive quantities of cheap capital are moving into renewables. There's technology leaps in all sorts of different dimensions of technology. And there's a gold rush on. The new gold rush is to find the best solar and wind resources in the world. And they are very far-sighted entrepreneurs that are buying up rights along our coasts in Mpumalanga and other places to places where you're going to build wind farms and solar farms. And so they're going to make a lot of money just from being entrepreneurial. So if you look at the global projections through to 2050, coal's going to be going to decline, gas to some extent, nuclear to quite a big extent, hydro to some extent, but wind is going to grow, as you can see here, and solar is going to grow. And basically, by 2050, you get to more or less 50-50. So if you look at this in terms of electricity generation, as you can see here, this is wind and solar, and this is not capacity. This is actually the amount of power being generated by 2050. And if you look at the installed capacity, this is where we are now. This is where we'll be most likely by 2050. And you can see again massive growth in solar and wind based on current trajectories. If you look at the levelized cost of energy over time, this is the yellow is a solar PV. You can see between 2010 and 2020 from over 350 down to 50. And basically the same story with all the other renewables. And I'm not going to dwell on that because I don't have time. The big story at the moment is the decline in battery prices. Very, very dramatic from 2010 to the present. And that has major implications for large-scale application of renewables, because you do need battery storage. But this is actually probably, in my view, going to get overtaken by the hydrogen revolution, which is the alternative storage system. If you look at the cost of renewables in the South African context, what you have here is 2010 in blue and 2018 in green. And as you can see, massive drop from 5 Rand 33 cents in 2010 to 1 Rand 22 in 2018. And the projections for the fifth round are to drop below 60 cents. Wind, similarly, while Eskom's, the cost of Eskom electricity has gone up. And these are the prices across the different bid windows. So our policy context is well known to all of you: the IRP, the Eskom roadmap, our nationally determined contribution, the National Planning Commission Just Transition scenario, which has resulted in the sorry, it should be 4Cs, I think, P4C, the National Infrastructure Strategy, which references a green bond, the National Treasury frameworks, as well as, most importantly, in my view, the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, which has a chapter on the energy transition. And the first line is, the energy transition is no longer a choice, it's mandatory. So this is the RP, which I'm not going to dwell on. You're familiar, but I think it is worth looking at what the RP is saying. The RP is basically has this scenario in mind. There's a cap on the amount of renewables, wind and solar, that is allowed to be constructed, adding another 100 billion onto the price tag of our future energy. And that means that we have to build new coal from the late 2030s onwards. And nobody knows where you're going to get the funding for that, because by then nobody's going to give you money to build new coal-fired power stations. So our policy is out of line with the finances. The lowest cost, if you want to, the ANC policy as a party is lowest cost. And if you plot what lowest cost means, you have to start phasing out coal and not build new nuclear and build massively renewables. And this is what you will end up with by 2050 is 180,000 megawatts of capacity, more than 50% of which is renewables. And that's the lowest cost option according to the CSRR. And if you did that, over the next 10 years, you would require about 250 billion rands worth of investment, which is really good news, because the more money we invest, and there's lots of cheap money to do this, the more jobs we create. If you're much more ambitious, you want to build quite a lot of renewables, you'll need about 350 billion. And if you want to be very ambitious and really end up with no coal and a decarbonized economy, a net zero economy, which some government ministers have started to talk about, and Eskom has formally committed itself to, you'll need about 450 billion rands worth of investment. That in turn is going to generate a lot of jobs. So if anybody tells you that renewables are job destroyers, they actually are not true to the empirics. 10,000 jobs per gigawatt is what we currently generate, if you look at our build record, but also on average globally. So 5 gigawatts per annum, which is what we should be doing, would generate 50,000 construction jobs. But these are permanent, because once you start building a renewable energy plant, every 20 years you have to replace it. So they're construction jobs that don't end. You just keep on building, and you create 200 jobs per terawatt. And by 2050, there will be 400 terawatts of power on the grids. That's 80,000 jobs. And there's 56,000 coal workers who work in the mines that supply coal to Eskom. So there's many jobs. There's a whole hydrogen story, which I don't have time to go into here, which Blade and Zamandi has been championing, and I think that's in the right direction, and it provides a new lease of life for Sasol, which does need a new lease of life. Now, if you follow the IRP, this is how many jobs you're going to create per annum, going up 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, going up to 35,000. If you are more ambitious, this is what you're going to go up to by 2025, around 30,000 jobs, rising to about 50,000 jobs per annum. And if you're very ambitious, an aggressive renewable energy build, you can see these are the jobs, 50,000 jobs by 2028 per annum, escalating to nearly 70,000. When you look at the costs of the aggressive renewable energy, I don't want to dwell on this, it's a bit complex, but basically it doesn't cost you very much more. So I'd like to end off with this slide, and before I make a final comment, which is the World Economic Forum Energy Transition Readiness Index in 2019, which puts South Africa as ready for the energy transition at number 114 out of 115 countries. Good news is that in the 2020 energy index, we've moved up a few to, I think it's 109. And that's because of the new policy commitments that we're making to renewable energy installation. So to conclude, I think what would be good to do is then have a conversation about, well, if a more circular approach to the use of resources makes business sense in a world where rising prices are making it increasingly expensive to do things in the old way, and if the cheapest money and the largest quantities of money are available to finance the energy transition, which is what many other African countries are beginning to realize, how do we take advantage of that new situation? And to some extent we are, but are we doing it quickly enough? So let me leave it there just as a kind of set of provocations about the kind of state of the world that we're in, which is changing very, 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 very rapidly. And all the most advanced research and innovation is really taking place in these two fields, resources and decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that was amazing. First thing, can I ask you, I knew it was coming and there's already some requests. Would it be okay to get a copy of your presentation? Thank you.
And I'm happy to provide other readings, other materials, or separate seminars, or anything that you will find useful.
Thank you. So we now have time, as usual, for questions, conversation, etc. Can I just ask that you either just say something or else just put up your hand in the chat room, at the bottom. General, you look like somebody who wants to ask. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. It is true that the world is shifting. But as you're all aware, in South Africa, we have a lot of resources which could be developed to mitigate against climate change challenges. When it comes to the resources, unfortunately, we seem to be obsessed in building up railway lines to the harbor so that that raw material is taken out to countries like China. This presentation, I think it would have suited well if it were to be presented, let's say, for instance, to the cabinet when they go to the Lekhuta, because this working in silos is not doing well for the country. If a presentation of this nature were to be escalated to that level, where you will find that the emphasis here is to say, let us sustain our resources properly. Having said that, I think we must also accept that we are still lagging far behind the technology in certain areas, especially that South Africa was once hit by sanctions. So some of the companies really are still struggling to upgrade their technology. But be that as it may, we need to close ranks and identify key areas. Take, for instance, the metallic areas, like the raw materials like platinum. We could use that material to produce more catalytic converters for our vehicles. That every vehicle which is going to be exported from South Africa must be fitted with that material. We have it here at home. But we will leave it like that at the moment. But I hope that this presentation can also find its way to the Presidential Council on climate change. Lastly, some of the raw materials like sand and so on, which makes cement and other things, you will find that as a result of our rivers being silted, there's no flow of water now, and people are randomly go to those rivers and take that sand. Whereas if the same area we were to be turn it around and say, let us create jobs for the people to maintain the rivers, to make sure that the soil erosion is attended to. There are many things involved here. But anyway, let me stop there.
Mark, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, okay. I agree with the overall argument. I think when it comes to, just to take your example of platinum, the catalytic converter story is what we have, that's the story that we have participated in. But there's a new story, which is hydrogen. So the electrolyzers that are required to convert water into hydrogen will require platinum. And the hydrogen revolution is taking off very, very, very fast globally. In 2018, 2019, Eskom used 292 billion liters of water in their power stations. That resource starts to become available as the power stations close, and it creates the possibility of a new hydrogen that would be ammonia, which we can start thinking of that really does exploit our resources better. And just to give another example, a rare metals deposit has been discovered near Riebeek-Eerst in the Cape. And the Chinese are desperately trying to buy it, and it's owned by a group of foreigners and one or two South Africans. And I've been trying to facilitate a BE buyout of that, but weirdly enough, the financial decisions to support the South Africans buying the most strategic resource in the new global economy is not happening. And that's really sad. We're probably going to lose control of our rare metal supply.
Not good news. Honorable Winkler.
Just try and put on my video. Thank you so much, Professor Swilling. That was a very informative presentation, and some really, I would say, uncomfortable truths to swallow. What I did want to ask is that you said that basically our ability to extract resources is going to be constrained in the future. You know, you have to process more, and you're getting less. It's going to become far more expensive. How exactly are companies reviewing their business models in light of this information? Because obviously they are profit maximizing machines. So how do you see a transition when it comes to these huge conglomerates and multinational corporations, and what are their plans exactly to offset that? Then I'd like to know, what do you think about, we're talking about constrained resources, about the peak oil and peak water and theory, and, you know, the time frame for that exactly, because they say obviously that, you know, they're going to be global water wars, because as water becomes more scarce, it's the most precious commodity. Do you have any information on that perhaps, and how we can prepare for that? Then a lot of people would say that, you know, okay, fine, we're 1% contributors in terms of global CO2 emissions, and that's on par with Germany, but Germany is already a very developed country, right? So they've already had hundreds of years to get to a point where they are now able to transition or decarbonize, but South Africa is still sort of in its infancy. So there's that sort of argument that comes into it when people are trying to criticize a rapid decarbonization. And perhaps if you have some comment on that. Then the other sort of rebuttals that I get when I do talk about decarbonization is that there are a lot of hidden costs when it comes to renewables in terms of the infrastructure and the grids and smart grids. And that basically, we know solar PV is the cheapest per kilowatt hour at the moment, but when you take into consideration all those other costs, it's actually more expensive than coal. But coal also has, I think, hidden subsidies as well. So, I mean, where can we get this information so that we can actually make sort of an informed, I would say, or get an informed opinion on the actual cost? And then looking at transport infrastructure in South Africa, I mean, that's a huge thing. We don't have really good infrastructure as it is, you know, trains, buses, taxis, etc. And now we want to obviously transition to these greener economies. What ideas would you suggest or do you have about transitioning our logistics sector and transport into a sort of a green mode? And what kind of investment and capital will we need for that? And, you know, is that available? And then, yeah, I did want to ask if you could maybe perhaps with some of these points have a future presentation that we could participate in. I'm very interested to get into sort of the detail of a lot of these points. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Great list of questions. On your last point, you know, through Milani, more than happy to make myself available for more in-depth, maybe more relaxed, longer session for in-depth discussion. On the role of corporations, you just have to look at what the mining companies are doing, getting out of mining as fast as possible, especially the coal companies. They just, you know, it's like holding a hot potato. How can I get rid of this? I'm just selling it for a couple of dollars. So, you know, all over the world, mining companies are trying to get out of mining, especially coal. And financial investors, the biggest corporations in the world, are actually withdrawing from fossil fuels, and they're all reading the writing on the wall. If you look at the crisis in Australia, there are very dire predictions that with the drop in prices of energy as a result of the rise in the number of renewables, a number of power stations have become financially unviable. And now there's talk of actually closing power stations long before their dead stop dates. In South Africa, we don't have that problem. We have one of the oldest coal-fired power fleets in the world. We have to close 6 of our power stations within the next 3 years. We have to. And most of them have to close except for 2 within the next 20 years. We have to close them. And we can't build new ones. And if you are a coal miner and you're looking and you're just looking at the bare actual facts, you just know that your business your mining business is just not there. And so you have to shift. And we in South Africa, we are blessed with a massive, extraordinary range of resources, including rare metals, but all sorts of other metals that are required by the new global economy that's emerging. The carbonized global economy is going to require a whole bunch of additional materials that we don't currently use on scale, and most of those in South Africa. So mining companies have to shift, and some of them are starting to realize that. On peak oil, the total amount of oil we've produced hasn't gone above 75 billion barrels per day since 2005. So the oil has basically peaked since 2005. But the peak oil approach is focused on production. I tend to focus on consumption. So I think there's peak consumption. So in other words, demand. And this has got a lot to do with the fact that it costs more, you need more and more energy to get the energy out of the ground. So in the 30s, you needed 1 barrel of oil to get 100 barrels of oil out of the ground. Now, with 1 barrel of oil, you get about 10. And so, you know, just the long-term trajectory of that is pretty clear. In terms of Germany and the South Africa differential development debate, which, you know, is just also 1990s actually. Just forget about the environment, forget about the climate, forget about anything. Just say, how do I get the cheapest possible electricity onto the grid to meet the energy needs of every South African? How do I do that? If you do the rands and cents calculations, you will arrive at renewable energy. So you can't do development in South Africa if you continue to do development business as usual using coal-fired power stations, because we have to close them and no one's going to give you the money to build new ones. It's as simple as that. So if you want to do development business as usual in South Africa to eradicate poverty and reduce inequality, you have no option. You have to do what some would like to call green, but just call it development. Just do the rands and cents, just do calculations. The problem is in South Africa, when you talk renewables, immediately people put spectacles on and they just see green. And they say, oh no, I don't like green. I don't like that color. So I don't want to do renewables. What they're doing is saying, I don't like development. And that doesn't make sense, because that's the only way. So just coming to your question on the hidden costs to renewables, what people are normally referring to is storage and grid capacity. So basically, if you do the numbers, new coal is more expensive than new renewables. So that's what you should be comparing, not new renewables and existing coal. Existing coal, with all the hidden costs, actually is cheaper than new renewables, because new renewables is going to require additional grid. So to put it very, very simply, the bulk of our coal-fired capacity is up in the northeast, Mpumalanga, and that's where the biggest grid capacity is. Where's the greatest solar and sun resources? It's in the southwest. But where's the grid weakest? It's in the southwest. So we have to put 150 gigs of renewables onto the grid in the next 10, 15 years. But most of that is going to be in the southwest where the grid is weak. So we have to build a grid. And, you know, I mean, the grid, when you look at anywhere in the world, you want to do new generation and you have to extend the grid for that, the grid is like 5% of the total cost. In South Africa, for maybe 20, 25 billion, we could extend the grid to where it needs to go in order to connect the renewables. And that's not a lot of money. We're going to be spending 250 billion at least on new renewables capacity. So it's 10%. But it is a hidden cost, and it is should be factored into the total package. The same applies for storage. All the models at the moment actually underestimate the total amount of storage. And storage used to be expensive. It's now much cheaper, but it's still a cost. And you need to include that so that you have the kind of backup that is needed in any renewables system. But we can produce those batteries ourselves. And if we go to hydrogen and storage, it's a much better long-term option. I always advise investors, don't put all your eggs into the battery storage basket. I really do think it's going to shift quickly away into hydrogen. And then transport, that's the key big challenge. If you want to go net zero by 2050, we're going to have to connect as much mobility to the electricity grid as possible. So the strategy should be electrification. That should be our policy commitment. We want to electrify anything that you can electrify. Cars, cars in particular, buses, everything. The more that is electrified, the better, because then you can connect those grids to renewable energy infrastructures. And then that's how the transition is going to take place. So trains, buses, mass transit systems are the future. We have to get people out of cars. If they're in cars, they're going to shift to hybrids and electric cars anyway, and we're going to be electrifying our motorways so that you could fill up with hydrogen or with electricity. On hydro is a good storage system, but not in South Africa. We just don't have. We've basically used up. If we start putting more and more storage into hydro, we end up destroying a lot of biodiversity. There's not really an option, and you don't really need it. It's expensive, and some people will disagree with that statement. I think hydrogen is a better option in the longer run.
Honorable Singh, jump in. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Melanie, and to all my colleagues that are there. Let me apologize. I only joined you at 12:30 because we had a Chief Whips Forum that was unusually long after what happened yesterday. So forgive me if I ask some things that may have been covered by the presenters. But, we generally agree with the regenerative approach, not only for South Africa, but I think for the universe. Otherwise, just now we won't have anything left around us for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I just wanted to ask the 114 out of 115, what was the criteria for looking at that? And was it an assessment of the government, the performance of government in terms of environmental issues, or was it the country? And then the reason I'm asking that is I just want to piggyback on what Honorable Winkler asked. To what extent do you believe that industry, and not only SOEs, but general industry, are coming to the party in South Africa in terms of a regenerative approach? We know, it's common knowledge that, even before 1994, and I think, Melanie, you were an MP then, and after 1994, where we started looking at issues of acid mine drainage, etc., where these mining companies came from outside of our country, did whatever, raped us, took away our resources, and then left us hanging with the problem of trying to rehabilitate these areas. So to what extent do you think industry is contributing or not contributing to this regenerative approach? And my second question would be on things like offshore oil exploration. Now, I know just outside where I live, there's some exploration, that there are communities that are coming together and say, we can't do this, it's anti-environment, it's anti. How do you balance the need for South Africa to have this resource and community objections to some of these issues? And the two biggest, I think, culprits in terms you're talking about coal and electricity are Eskom and Sasol in our country. And I don't think government is doing enough to rein them in. So I just thought I'd get some of your comments. Thank you very much, Melanie, and thank you for organizing this again.
Yeah, okay. So on the readiness index, the World Economic Forum compiles that in the, the usual global imperial way for countries around the world. So take it with a pinch of salt. It's not. It's just a. There is a grain of truth in the fact that up until very recently, we are not ready for the biggest industrial transformation taking place in the global economy. But that's slowly starting to shift, which relates to your last point on Eskom and Sasol. I mean, both the CEOs of both Eskom and Sasol have read the writing on the wall. I mean, the CEO of Eskom has said the future of Eskom is renewables. And Eskom board has adopted a net zero policy framework. And the Eskom is actually putting a lot of pressure on government to enable Eskom to accelerate the energy transition. So Eskom has a lot of support from the presidency, from DEF, from DPE, but not from DMRE. So the of minerals and energy is a coal fundamentalist. I mean, he really doesn't like the fact that I call him that. He called me to his office to tell me to stop, but I'm not going to stop because he has shown no interest in what is financially the most profitable source of energy and the most cheapest source of energy for the majority of the people. And as a former Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers, it's the best thing for the mining sector to shift to a diversity with a multiplicity of different value chains, rather than just continuing to hang on to the one that is going to die, which is coal. So I think Eskom is ahead of government, actually, to be perfectly honest. I think even I would be so bold as to say that Eskom is ahead of the legislature as well. However, and Sasol, the CEO of Sasol, has started to make very serious interventions about Sasol's future business being hydrogen, because basically the technology that South Africa was a global leader in actually is the same technology for converting water into hydrogen, and then using the gas infrastructure that's available to make the hydrogen available. So it's a great business model. So both the biggest CO2 polluters are on track, I think, but they don't have a friendly enough policy environment. And that's where the legislature could actually make a big difference. The DMRE is a millstone around the neck of all South Africans, because it's not doing its job to enable South Africa to catch up. Just to give one example, the Cabinet Office in the UK is preparing the next COP, and they've set up the Energy Transition Council, which is like the leading countries that are going to be the poster childs of energy transition at the next COP. And that's just another fancy way of saying they are standing in line to collect the cheapest amounts of cash in largest quantities in order to decarbonize their economies. South Africa didn't respond to the invitation they were sent. No, you know what that means in rands, in dollars. You know what that means in terms of investment, in terms of innovation, in terms of jobs. It's like the most economically damaging thing you could possibly do in the world today. Saying, no, I'm not interested in the cheapest cash around for industrial transformation taking place. But business is actually, to answer your question, business is alive. Business has been calling for a much more coherent policy on the energy transition, and including mining. The Mining Council has basically said we support much more concerted action on renewables, because mines need to be able to say that their products are decarbonized in terms of the international markets. They need steady supply. That means it's installing embedded generation within the mines. And so I think you see across business, and actually quite a strong position on saying, it's time that we face this reality. It's a great, and the Presidential Economic Advisory Council is basically it's like reiterating what business has been saying. On offshore oil, you know, if the rands and cents work, do it. But if it's more expensive than renewables, don't. And for those communities, they've got more to gain from renewables.
Thank you. I also wanted to just inform the members that there is a similar group of MPs of the similar environmental committee in the UK Parliament, in the House of Commons, who has reached out to me and Andrea at the Wilderness Foundation in the hope that they would be able to have some collaborations or just some joint discussions and so on in anticipation of the COP meeting, which I think is in November, right? Right, Mark? I think it's in November. Yeah. And it is in Africa. So they've been asked, I think they've been asked that we could meet various things and discuss various things and see if we can collaborate on that. So we will work on that and discuss it with the chairperson and with you as well. Honorable Bruno, I think, is there, right? Are you? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Professor and Melanie for this presentation. I have just one question on there's a slide on the global material extraction, which goes up to 2010. I'm just checking if we can get the similar slide from 2010, maybe up to 2019 or 2020, so that we can see the trends of all those materials. How do they perform? What is it? What is the stand of now? What is the position right now? And the other one, the next question and the last one is that I want to check if as a country, in terms of the decoupling of the natural resources and its use, if we do have if they do have a document, a guide document that we can use that says in terms of these kinds of resources, this is how far we can go, this is how far we can try and minimize the use of those resources. I don't know, I'm just checking if they do have such a research. If they have, I would appreciate if we can get it. Thank you.
Yeah, so just on the projections to 2050, they were there, but not in a very, it's some of those numbers that I had to 2060. But the summary is that we're at 70 billion tons now. If we run the global economy on a business as usual basis to 2050, in other words, over the next 30 years, which is not long, we're going to double that consumption at current rates. So we're going to go up to 140 billion tons of stuff. And there's no scientific evidence to substantiate the claim that the resources we require to do that exist. So just think of double. Just by the way, for the environmentalists in the room, when you say you use 70 billion tons, we actually extract 140. We use half of what we extract. So 140 by 2050 is 280 billion tons. Anyway, that's just a footnote. On your question of a document with respect to the South African context, that's a wonderful, wonderful challenge. The data exists, and there are places like the Center for Cleaner Production and others that are to track resources. I have a PhD student who's doing a material flow analysis for the South African economy. But you're right, I don't know of a neat policy-oriented document that kind of joins the dots and says, this is what a resource-efficient South African economy would look like. I don't think that's been done. So that's a wonderful challenge. Thank you.
Honorable Mbata.
Thank you, Melanie. My apology for joining late. I was still busy nursing my issue. But what I want to say, thanks for this presentation. And what I can say is that in the circular economy, here, I think everywhere, even in South Africa, it requires a collaboration between government, businesses, and consumers. And without them, the three parties being involved and working together on this, it's really going to leave us behind as South Africa. But what I like is that the other thing is that this is based on the longevity and reuse of material, of which I've noticed that. It's just that here in South Africa, when it comes to using waste, generating energy from waste, we are still behind. I know Japan, they are doing that, and it's happening. And if you can look at that and on how they are doing it, there is no waste that you can get anywhere in Japan. The population is very high, but their waste management, it's up to standard. And what I can say, that's the first thing that we must benchmark with Japan and start generating our own energy from the waste. Because if you look at our landfill sites, they are almost full. We are running short of landfill sites in South Africa because of the waste that is not separated at source. Firstly, that's very important to separate it at source. And then it's either you reuse it or you recycle it or generate it into waste, because it's lying there in the disposal sites, and it's causing damage to the underground water because of the leachate. It's also causing a health hazard to the nearby communities who are staying because of how we don't have so much land. So when they build towards those landfill sites. And also the people who are picking up waste to trying to get something for them to reuse or resell for money. It is a health hazard to them. And I've noticed that there's not much that as South Africa we are doing to that. Neither us looking at how we can develop a situational based policy to deal with that situation. That's what we are lacking as South Africa. But I'm saying, I can say that we have good policies. The only thing is the implementation and monitoring that needs to be done, and also work on the situational based policies development. But I can say that there are some companies, the private sector, that are already starting to work with the government, where they recycle or reuse their material in order to reduce what must go to the landfill site. Like the guys that are dealing with the bottled water, I forgot their name. And I know the Nike also is recycling their material. And what I like also, I was just on Monday, I went to deliver boreholes to the emerging farmers in Hammanskraal. And I learned a lot from that young woman. Because when I arrived there, when I was doing oversight, I saw there was a heap of the tins that have been used. There was a heap of those tins, and there was a heap of the bones. Then I said, but you are you are planting here, you're doing farming. Why are you keeping this? Are you also doing recycling? He said, Mama, he's a young girl, very young and very intelligent. He said, Mama, in order to get zinc for my soil, I use the tin. And in order to get calcium for my plants, I use the bones. But this is, she showed me how she used it so that at the end, it becomes the manure. It's an organic farm. And I was so shocked because how many of those tins that we throw away, how many of those bones that we throw away, if we can start separating from our households and donate to these emerging farmers so that they can reuse this material, and it also assists the number or the percentage of the waste that is going to the landfill site. And I also had that idea when I was talking to Karabo. Her name is Karabo. Karabo, I think if I have time or I have a funder, I want to open an agricultural tertiary, or you call it a college or so, that will teach these youngsters and teach them on how to use what is available within their areas in order for us to have a clean environment and also produce organic vegetables. So in short, what I'm saying that there are those individuals who are doing that, but there's no collaboration where you find that it's a team of the government, the private sector, and the consumers. We need to put more efforts in that. But I'm happy because now the minister did mention that they are now producing electric cars in South Africa. There was one that was produced during the era of the late Minister of Agriculture. May her soul rest in peace. I know there was one, but now currently they said there's a plant also that is dealing with producing electric cars, and which is going to resolve lots of issues, carbon dioxide and so forth. And my take is that this is good, but we need to make sure that there's that teamwork between the three individuals that must take part, and all of them must listen to each other and make sure that they have one big project that can be used for us. And lastly, I would like to say, I've also seen some small emerging farmers using the tires where they don't have land, using the tires for planting their vegetables, of which I become very happy as part of the environmentalist to see all these things happening. But it's being done by the consumer down there. How do we get them so that they become a bigger picture in dealing with this thing? Thank you.
Mark, do you want to comment on any of that? I mean, I think one of the places that the Honorable Mbata can go and have a look as well is at Spear, and there's some of this organic farming on a mass scale going on, and I know Mark was part of the inception of that. But there's some amazing things happening there, and of the circular of how you can run even a place like a hotel or the farming in a very green and environmental way. But you can mention.
Yeah, just maybe two comments. Mbata, formally invite you to come to the Sustainability Institute. We have a agricultural college that trains people in regenerative agriculture. It's a 3-year diploma funded by the Department of Land Reform and Agriculture. So it's a really successful program, and the demand for the graduates is through the roof. I mean, if there were 3 times the graduates that all have jobs. And they're trained in exactly what you're talking about. So more than welcome to come visit and meet them. They're mainly Black women who are the graduates, and very talented. Just on the waste story, there's a saying in sustainability that you can't recycle yourself to sustainability. And that's particularly true in South Africa because our waste stream is actually relatively small, because we have a small middle class. And so to meet our development challenges, we are more dependent than Japan than on virgin materials. But as we develop, the waste stream enlarges and becomes more of a viable input and so on. But that said, the agricultural stream within the waste stream is an incredibly valuable resource, a source of nutrients, and we just throw them away.
I think we should start rounding up because it is also lunchtime. I'm getting, Mark, I'm getting a lot of texts here from members who are texting me saying they would love to come to Spier and see the places. And I think as soon as members are comfortable actually moving around together and go and see things, we can definitely arrange that and possibly have then some more time with Mark as well. Before I close, can I just say, General, did you want to say something else?
Yes,
yes, go ahead.
I think what we should do is to go back to the conventions which you are signatories to. I'm thinking about Sustainable Development Convention, which we hosted here, and also the Biodiversity Convention, and look at the biodiversity policies and sustainable development policies we have embarked upon after those conventions. In that way, I think those two are more important to close the ranks around this issue. The third one would be on waste management. Out of that, I'm certain that we will be in a position, not criticizing the government in a way, but we would be in a position to say, if we have followed up on these conventions and implemented most of them, we would be in a better position right now. I would also, in closing, encourage the Portfolio Committee on Environment, the Commission on Climate Change, Presidential Commission on Climate Change, that they should close ranks and sit down and share some of these issues, and possibly do an inspection or rather a visit to the said institute at Stellenbosch. I'm sure we can emerge out of that with concrete, coordinated setups, not forgetting the economic cluster to be involved in such processes. That's my closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Mark, did you want to just say a final few words? And then before I close, I also just want to ask members a question about our next meeting. So please don't log off if you still have a few minutes. Mark, do you want to just say a few things in closing?
No. Just thank you for this opportunity. I really enjoyed the discussion. You're more than welcome to come visit the Sustainability Institute, not Spier. On the other side of the railway line is the Sustainability Institute in more ways than one. And it's also one of South Africa's first socially mixed, ecologically designed communities. So with organic farms, but also training institutions at multiple levels, including Montessori and so on and so forth. So it's an integrated community. Welcome to come anytime.
Thank you. So thank you very, very much, Mark. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. If you want to log off, feel free to go. I just want to speak with members. Thank you.
I need to go to my next meeting. Thank you.